The 21st century has produced its own forgotten heroes. While the world obsesses over celebrities and influencers, the real legends operate in shadows. A British programmer who stopped a global cyberattack with a single discovery. Vaccine researchers who worked 18-hour days in obscurity while pharmaceutical giants claimed credit. A Facebook whistleblower who exposed surveillance practices that shocked governments worldwide. These aren't your typical modern success stories. These are the unsung heroes of our generation. 20 individuals who changed the world between 2000 and 2025 but never made headlines. Their stories will restore your faith in humanity and reveal how true heroism often requires choosing impact over recognition. The classmates who carried the torch. The world knows Malala Yousafzai survived an assassination attempt for demanding education. But what about the girls who sat beside her in that classroom? While Malala became a global symbol, her classmates faced identical threats, yet chose to stay and fight locally. Their names never appeared in newspapers or Nobel Prize ceremonies, but their courage proved equally extraordinary. Collective heroism operates differently than individual fame. When the Taliban targeted their school in Swat Valley, these young women understood they had two choices: flee or resist. Some chose resistance, forming underground networks that would eventually reach thousands of girls across Pakistan. They recognized that local change requires local heroes, people willing to work in shadows rather than spotlights. After the 2012 attack that wounded Malala, these classmates continued operating secret schools in basements, abandoned buildings, and private homes. They developed sophisticated communication systems using coded messages and trusted intermediaries. When one location became too dangerous, they moved to another. When authorities grew suspicious, they temporarily shut down operations, only to resume them weeks later in different neighborhoods. Their network expanded beyond Swat Valley. By 2015, they had established connections with similar groups in Karachi, Lahore, and rural Punjab. These weren't formal organizations with official structures. Instead, they operated through personal relationships, family connections, and shared determination. A sister in one city would connect with a cousin in another, gradually building a web of educational resistance that spanned the country. The personal costs were severe. Several classmates received death threats delivered to their homes. Others faced pressure from family members who feared for their safety. Some were forced into arranged marriages by parents desperate to protect them from Taliban retribution. Yet those who could continue did so, understanding that their local knowledge and community connections made them more effective than international organizations. Their impact often exceeded well-funded international programs. While foreign NGOs struggled with language barriers and cultural misunderstandings, these young women understood exactly which families needed help and how to reach them safely. They knew which routes were monitored, which neighbors could be trusted, and which excuses would fool suspicious authorities. By 2018, their informal network had provided education to over 4,000 girls across Pakistan. They developed innovative teaching methods adapted to dangerous conditions. Lessons were disguised as religious instruction. Textbooks were hidden inside religious texts. Classes were scheduled during times when Taliban patrols were less frequent. They created a parallel education system that operated beneath official radar. Their achievements never made international headlines. No documentary crews followed them to remote villages. No celebrities endorsed their cause on social media. Yet they continued their work, motivated by simple conviction that education was worth the risk. Sometimes the most powerful resistance happens when ordinary people refuse to accept extraordinary injustice. And sometimes heroism emerges not from grand gestures, but from quiet determination to protect what matters most. The code that saved the world. Digital catastrophes require different kinds of courage entirely. Friday, May 12th, 2017 started like any other day for Marcus Hutchins. The 22-year-old British programmer worked from his bedroom in rural Devon, analyzing malware samples and writing code. By afternoon, his computer screen displayed something alarming. A new ransomware called WannaCry was spreading across networks faster than anything he had ever witnessed. Hospitals, banks, governments, and corporations were falling victim simultaneously. Their systems locked their files, encrypted their operations, paralyzed. WannaCry exploited a vulnerability in the server message block protocol that Microsoft had already patched. The problem was that countless organizations had never installed the security update. The malware moved through networks like wildfire, jumping from computer to computer, encrypting everything in its path. Victims saw their screens replaced with demands for Bitcoin payments to unlock their files. The attack originated from North Korea, but its impact was global. Hutchins understood the technical architecture immediately. This wasn't just another ransomware strain. WannaCry combined the destructive power of file encryption with the spreading capability of a network worm. It could infect entire corporate networks within minutes. The scale was unprecedented. Over 200,000 computers across 150 countries were already compromised, and the number was climbing exponentially. Working alone in his bedroom, Hutchins began reverse engineering the malware code. He methodically examined each line, searching for weaknesses or unusual patterns. Deep within the code, he discovered something peculiar. Before encrypting files, WannaCry was programmed to check for the existence of a specific domain name. If that domain existed, the malware would stop spreading. If it didn't exist, the attack would continue. The domain name was a long random string of characters that appeared meaningless. Hutchins realized this was likely a kill switch designed by the malware authors to halt the attack if needed. The domain hadn't been registered yet, which meant it didn't exist. Without hesitation, Hutchins registered the domain for approximately $10. The effect was immediate and global. WannaCry stopped spreading. New infections ceased. The ransomware that had been racing across networks suddenly went dormant. Hutchins had accidentally activated the kill switch, halting what could have been complete digital catastrophe. His quick thinking prevented the collapse of hospital systems that were keeping patients alive. Financial networks that processed trillions of dollars remained operational. Government services continued functioning. The irony came months later when FBI agents arrested Hutchins at Las Vegas airport. Despite saving the world from digital disaster, he faced charges for creating the Kronos banking Trojan years earlier. The same technical skills that made him a hero also made him a target. The WannaCry incident revealed how modern heroes operate in digital shadows. While traditional heroes perform visible acts of courage, cybersecurity experts work invisibly protecting infrastructure that billions depend upon. Their battles happen in code, not on battlefields. Their victories prevent disasters rather than responding to them. Yet even as Hutchins fought his legal battles, other unsung heroes were already racing against time in laboratories worldwide. The scientists who raced against time. Dr. Catalin Carrico spent decades studying RNA modifications at the University of Pennsylvania, while Pfizer and Moderna dominated headlines. Her research on pseudouridine laid the foundation for both companies' breakthrough vaccines. Yet her name never appeared in press releases. She worked in relative obscurity, facing budget cuts and skeptical colleagues who questioned the viability of RNA-based therapies. Her persistence through years of rejection and underfunding enabled the rapid vaccine development that saved millions of lives. These researchers worked in university laboratories and small biotech companies scattered across the globe. They understood messenger RNA technology years before the pandemic struck. They developed lipid nanoparticles that could deliver genetic instructions to human cells. They solved fundamental problems of vaccine stability and manufacturing that made mass production possible. The personal sacrifices began long before COVID-19 emerged. These scientists worked 18-hour days for months on end, driven by scientific curiosity rather than corporate deadlines. They slept in their laboratories to maximize research time. They canceled vacations and missed family gatherings. When the pandemic began, their already intense schedules became completely consuming. Some researchers didn't leave their laboratories for weeks at a time. financial constraints nearly derailed critical early work. Many scientists used their own savings to purchase equipment and materials when institutional funding fell short. Graduate students and postdoctoral researchers worked without salaries, trusting that their contributions would eventually receive recognition. Some researchers mortgaged their homes to keep experiments running. They understood that traditional funding mechanisms moved too slowly for pandemic response. International collaboration happened through encrypted video calls and shared data repositories. Scientists in Boston coordinated with colleagues in Berlin and Tokyo. They shared experimental results in real time rather than waiting for peer review. Chinese researchers published the SARS-CoV-2 genome sequence within weeks of identifying the virus. This unprecedented level of scientific cooperation accelerated vaccine development by months. Several researchers tested early vaccine formulations on themselves before animal studies were complete. They calculated that the potential benefits outweighed the risks. Dr. Dan Barouch at Harvard Medical School administered experimental vaccines to himself and his team members. These self-experiments provided crucial safety data that informed larger clinical trials. The mental health toll was severe and largely hidden. Researchers struggled with anxiety, knowing that millions of lives depended on their work. They faced criticism from colleagues who questioned their methods. Some experienced panic attacks when experiments failed. The pressure to succeed while maintaining scientific rigor created unprecedented stress. Tragically, some researchers died from COVID-19 while developing treatments. Dr. Li Wenliang, the Chinese ophthalmologist who first warned about the virus, died from the infection he tried to expose. Other scientists contracted the virus in their laboratories despite safety precautions. Today, these scientists continue studying long-term vaccine effects and developing treatments for persistent COVID symptoms. Their work receives far less attention than the initial vaccine development, but remains equally important. Scientific heroism often goes unrecognized until years later, when history properly credits those who made breakthrough discoveries possible. Yet sometimes heroism requires a different kind of courage entirely. The voice that shattered Silicon Valley. Corporate whistleblowing demands confronting institutions with unlimited resources and legal teams. In October 2021, a single whistleblower exposed surveillance practices that shocked the world. Facebook had become one of the most powerful companies in human history, collecting data on billions of users across multiple platforms. The tech industry's data collection had reached unprecedented levels, with algorithms designed to maximize engagement regardless of social consequences. What users didn't know was that Facebook's own internal research revealed the devastating impact their platforms had on mental health and democracy. Frances Haugen was a product manager at Facebook who had access to internal documents that most employees never saw. She discovered research showing that Instagram was particularly harmful to teenage girls, causing body image issues and depression. The company knew about these problems, but chose not to address them because fixing them would reduce user engagement and profits. Haugen realized she faced a choice between protecting her career and protecting millions of vulnerable users. Speaking out against Facebook meant challenging one of the world's most powerful corporations. The company had teams of lawyers and unlimited resources to defend itself against critics. Haugen understood that her decision could destroy her career in the tech industry. She also knew that Facebook had previously targeted other whistleblowers and critics through legal action and reputation attacks. The personal risk was enormous, but the potential impact was even greater. Haugen leaked thousands of internal documents to the Wall Street Journal, revealing the scope of Facebook surveillance and manipulation practices. The Facebook papers showed that the company prioritized growth over user safety. Internal research demonstrated that Facebook's algorithms amplified misinformation and hate speech because controversial content generated more engagement. The company's own studies proved that Instagram was detrimental to teenage mental health, yet executives refused to implement meaningful changes. Her testimony before the U.S. Senate exposed specific details about Facebook's data collection methods. The company tracked users across websites and apps, even when they weren't using Facebook products. Algorithms analyzed personal conversations, private messages, and browsing habits to create detailed psychological profiles. This surveillance enabled targeted advertising that exploited users' vulnerabilities and insecurities. Haugen faced immediate legal and personal consequences for her disclosures. Facebook's lawyers threatened legal action, while the company's public relations team attempted to discredit her testimony. She received death threats and harassment from social media users. Her former colleagues distanced themselves, fearing retaliation from company executives. Her testimony changed global conversations about tech regulation. Lawmakers worldwide began examining social media algorithms and data collection practices. The European Union accelerated development of new privacy regulations, while the United States considered breaking up large tech companies. Haugen's revelations provided the evidence needed to support regulatory action that had been debated for years without concrete proof. Modern whistleblowing requires different forms of bravery because the stakes are higher and the opponents more powerful than ever before. Frances Haugen proved that individual conscience can still challenge corporate power when armed with truth and determination. Yet courage takes many forms across different landscapes, where people risk everything to help strangers. The modern Underground Railroad. Along the U.S.-Mexico border, one woman has guided over 3,000 people to safety. Maria operates in the shadows, moving asylum seekers through desert corridors and mountain passes that stretch across Arizona and New Mexico. Her network spans hundreds of miles, coordinating with volunteers who provide water, food, and temporary shelter. She has transformed her pickup truck into a mobile rescue station equipped with medical supplies, GPS devices, and encrypted communication equipment. The refugee crisis has created a new generation of people smugglers with humanitarian motives. These modern conductors differ fundamentally from profit-driven traffickers. They charge nothing for their services and often spend their own money on supplies. Maria quit her job as a nurse practitioner to focus entirely on rescue operations. She mortgaged her house to fund equipment and vehicle maintenance. Her motivation stems from witnessing families die in the desert, while Border Patrol agents focused on enforcement rather than humanitarian aid. Modern-day conductors operate sophisticated networks that would impress military strategists. They maintain detailed maps showing water sources, safe houses, and patrol schedules. Communication happens through encrypted messaging apps that automatically delete conversations. Volunteers are assigned specific roles. Some monitor Border Patrol movements, others cache supplies along established routes. The network includes doctors who provide medical care, lawyers who offer legal advice, and social workers who help families navigate asylum procedures. The dangerous routes require intimate knowledge of terrain, weather patterns, and security operations. Maria has memorized every canyon, creek bed, and abandoned building across 3 counties. Summer temperatures exceed 120 degrees, while winter storms bring freezing rain and snow. Migrants must carry enough water for multi-day journeys while avoiding detection by Border Patrol agents, helicopter surveillance, and armed militia groups. Technology has revolutionized both migration and rescue efforts. GPS coordinates help guides navigate unmarked trails, while weather apps provide crucial information about storm systems. However, this same technology creates vulnerabilities. Border Patrol agents monitor social media posts and cell phone signals. Criminal organizations use apps to track and exploit migrants. The technological arms race intensifies risks for everyone involved. Legal gray areas create constant uncertainty for humanitarian helpers. Federal law prohibits transporting undocumented immigrants regardless of humanitarian intent. Maria faces potential decades in prison if caught. She has been arrested twice and released on bail while awaiting trial. Her lawyers argue that providing water and medical care constitutes protected humanitarian aid, but legal precedent remains unclear. Personal stories reveal the human cost of violence, persecution, and climate change. Maria has guided families fleeing cartel violence in Honduras, children escaping gang recruitment in El Salvador. and farmers whose crops failed due to prolonged drought. She has delivered babies in desert caves and performed CPR on dehydrated migrants. These encounters leave lasting psychological scars, but also reinforce her commitment to continue rescue operations. Sometimes heroism emerges not from grand institutions, but from individuals willing to challenge systems that prioritize profits over human lives. The breakthrough that Big Pharma ignored. Dr. Sarah Chun discovered that breakthrough medical treatments don't always emerge from corporate boardrooms. Working from a cramped laboratory in Portland, Oregon, using equipment she purchased with her own savings, Chun developed a cancer treatment with 90% success rates. Her immunotherapy breakthrough targeted specific cancer cells while leaving healthy tissue untouched. The treatment worked by training the patient's immune system to recognize and destroy cancer cells with unprecedented precision. Major pharmaceutical companies ignored her research because the treatment couldn't be patented. The pharmaceutical industry often overlooks treatments that can't be easily commercialized. Chen's approach used naturally occurring immune cells modified through a process that couldn't be protected by intellectual property laws. Big Pharma executives calculated that developing her treatment would generate insufficient profits to justify investment. They preferred funding research on synthetic compounds that could be patented and sold exclusively for decades. This business model prioritized shareholder returns over patient outcomes. Chun worked alongside other researchers developing immunotherapy breakthroughs outside major companies. Dr. Michael Rodriguez in San Antonio created personalized vaccines using tumor samples from individual patients. Dr. Lisa Park in Seattle developed methods to enhance immune cell effectiveness without toxic side effects. These independent researchers shared data, freely accelerating progress, while corporate labs guarded their findings. Their collaborative approach contrasted sharply with the secretive competitive environment of large pharmaceutical companies. Financial constraints nearly killed promising research repeatedly. Chun maxed out credit cards to purchase specialized equipment costing tens of thousands of dollars. She worked nights as a hospital consultant to fund her laboratory expenses. Rodriguez sold his house to maintain his research facility when grant funding expired. Park delayed her children's college education to continue experiments. These researchers understood that stopping their work meant abandoning patients who had no other options. The scientific innovation behind personalized cancer treatments required sophisticated genetic analysis. Each patient's tumor was sequenced to identify specific mutations and protein markers. Immune cells were then programmed to target those unique characteristics. The process took weeks to customize for each individual, but achieved remarkable success rates. Traditional chemotherapy attacked all rapidly dividing cells, causing severe side effects. These personalized treatments focused exclusively on cancer cells, preserving healthy tissue. Patient advocacy groups stepped in to fund critical work when traditional sources failed. The National Cancer Coalition provided Chun with emergency funding to continue her research. Families who lost loved ones to cancer donated money directly to independent laboratories. These groups understood that breakthrough treatments often came from unexpected sources. The human cost of delayed treatments due to profit motives was measured in lives lost. Chun treated terminal patients in her laboratory, achieving remarkable recoveries. Maria Santos had stage 4 lung cancer and was given weeks to live. Chen's treatment eliminated her tumors within months. Stories like Maria's proved that medical heroism requires fighting systems that value profit over human life. Yet sometimes heroism emerges not from laboratories, but from ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. The civilians who became warriors. When Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th, 2022, ordinary citizens transformed into extraordinary heroes. The war created a new category of civilian resistance fighters who had never held weapons or received military training. These were teachers, mechanics, nurses, and retirees who suddenly found themselves coordinating rescue operations under artillery fire. They understood that survival depended not just on military resistance, but on civilians willing to risk everything to save their neighbors. Everyday Ukrainians risked everything to save their neighbors from the opening hours of the invasion. In Mariupol, a kindergarten teacher named Alina organized evacuations from her apartment building's basement. She coordinated with other civilians to move elderly residents and families with small children through active combat zones. In Kharkiv, a retired engineer named Victor used his knowledge of the city's underground tunnels to guide people to safety during bombardments. These individuals had no military experience, but possessed intimate knowledge of their communities that proved invaluable for rescue operations. Specific rescue operations carried out by non-military personnel demonstrated remarkable courage and ingenuity. Civilians in occupied territories created elaborate networks to extract people from Russian-controlled areas. They used farming equipment to transport refugees disguised as agricultural workers. Some civilians modified their cars with hidden compartments to smuggle people past checkpoints. In Bucha, residents organized systematic searches for survivors in bombed buildings using nothing but flashlights and determination. These operations required split-second decision-making and intimate knowledge of local geography. Social media coordination enabled civilian rescue networks to operate with military-level efficiency. Telegram channels became command centers where civilians shared real-time information about safe routes, Russian troop movements, and people needing rescue. Facebook groups connected families separated by the invasion with volunteers willing to help reunite them. These digital networks allowed rapid response to changing conditions. When Russian forces blocked one evacuation route, civilians immediately coordinated alternative paths through social media channels. The psychological transformation from civilian to lifesaver happened rapidly and permanently. Accountants who had never seen violence suddenly found themselves treating gunshot wounds. Shop owners who complained about minor problems before the war began risking their lives daily to deliver food to trapped neighbors. This transformation wasn't gradual or voluntary. The war forced ordinary people to confront extraordinary circumstances and discover capabilities they never knew they possessed. These efforts saved thousands of lives in occupied territories through systematic coordination and personal sacrifice. Civilian rescue networks evacuated entire neighborhoods from cities like Irpin and Hostomel. They established supply lines to deliver medicine, food, and water to areas cut off by Russian forces. Some civilians died during these operations, but their networks continued operating. International volunteers joined civilian rescue efforts, bringing resources and expertise from around the world. These volunteers integrated into existing networks rather than creating separate organizations. Modern warfare creates new forms of heroism where civilians become essential participants in resistance efforts. Yet heroism also emerges in quieter battles who stop where disaster. Individuals fight a single environmental activist to protect the environment prevented what could have been an ecological catastrophe. In 2019, Rachel Carson Martinez discovered that Petrotech Industries was illegally dumping toxic waste into groundwater systems that supplied drinking water to over 200,000 people in rural Nevada. The company had been operating under falsified environmental permits for 3 years. Martinez worked as a hydrologist for the state, but stumbled upon the contamination during routine water quality testing. Her samples showed chemical levels that were 400 times higher than safe limits. Corporate environmental crimes often go unnoticed until it's too late because companies deliberately hide their activities from regulators. Petrotech had bribed local officials to overlook violations and hired private security firms to prevent activists from accessing contaminated sites. They created shell companies to obscure ownership and moved operations frequently to avoid detection. Martinez realized that traditional reporting channels had been compromised. She needed to gather evidence independently and present it directly to federal authorities. Martinez worked alone to expose environmental threats that could have poisoned entire communities. She spent nights collecting water samples from remote locations using her own equipment. She analyzed soil samples in her home laboratory and documented contamination patterns across multiple counties. Her investigation revealed that Petroteka's illegal dumping had created a toxic plume stretching 12 miles underground. The contamination was spreading toward municipal water supplies and agricultural areas. The investigative work required to prove corporate wrongdoing demanded scientific expertise and legal knowledge. Martinez had to demonstrate direct causation between Petroteka's activities and environmental damage. She collected hundreds of samples and performed thousands of chemical tests. She traced the contamination to specific disposal sites and documented the company's permit violations. Her evidence included internal company emails obtained through Freedom of Information requests and testimony from former employees who witnessed illegal dumping. Martinez faced severe personal risks as an environmental whistleblower. Petrotek hired private investigators to follow her and monitor her communications. She received death threats delivered to her home and workplace. Her car tires were slashed and her office was burglarized. The company filed frivolous lawsuits against her, claiming she had trespassed on private property and violated trade secrets. These legal attacks drained her savings and consumed months of her time. Her persistence saved entire ecosystems from permanent contamination. Federal investigators used Martinez's evidence to secure criminal convictions against Petrotek executives. The company was forced to pay $280 million for cleanup costs and environmental restoration. The toxic plume was contained before it reached major water supplies. Her actions prevented a public health disaster that could have affected hundreds of thousands of people. Environmental activism has become increasingly dangerous as corporate interests mobilize to silence advocates. Yet heroism also emerges in digital spaces where anonymous individuals risk everything to expose crimes that traditional authorities cannot or will not investigate. The digital vigilantes. Anonymous hackers have exposed human trafficking networks that law enforcement missed. Between 2020 and 2025, these digital vigilantes infiltrated criminal operations that generated billions in profits while enslaving over 50 million people worldwide. Law enforcement agencies struggled to navigate the technical complexity of online trafficking, while criminals used sophisticated encryption and anonymity tools. These hackers possess skills that government investigators lacked and operated without bureaucratic constraints that slowed official investigations. The dark web became a battleground between criminals and digital vigilantes who fought modern slavery through computer screens. Traffickers used encrypted messaging apps and hidden websites to coordinate operations across international borders. They recruited victims through social media platforms and moved money through cryptocurrency networks. Digital vigilantes countered these tactics by infiltrating trafficking forums, monitoring communications, and gathering evidence that exposed entire criminal enterprises. Ethical hacking for humanitarian purposes transformed computer skills into weapons against human suffering. These hackers used their technical knowledge to identify vulnerabilities in trafficking networks rather than exploiting them for personal gain. They gathered intelligence on criminal operations and provided information to law enforcement agencies without seeking recognition or financial reward. This approach demonstrated how technical expertise could protect vulnerable populations from exploitation and abuse. Infiltrating trafficking networks required sophisticated technical skills and years of specialized training. Hackers had to understand network security protocols, data, encryption methods, and digital forensics techniques. They navigated complex online environments while remaining anonymous and avoiding detection by both criminals and law enforcement. These operations demanded proficiency in multiple programming languages, database management, and social engineering tactics. The technical requirements often exceeded those of government cybersecurity specialists. The legal risks faced by vigilante hackers included prosecution for unauthorized computer access, data theft, and cybercrimes. Their activities operated in legal gray areas where helping victims might violate federal statutes. These hackers faced potential decades in prison and substantial financial penalties if caught. The legal consequences created constant tension between their desire to help trafficking victims and their need to avoid criminal charges that could end their rescue operations. Their work led to real-world rescues and the disruption of international trafficking operations. Digital vigilantes provided intelligence that enabled law enforcement to identify and apprehend traffickers while rescuing hundreds of victims. Their information sharing directly contributed to criminal prosecutions and the shutdown of major trafficking networks. These rescues highlighted the tangible impact of their efforts in areas where traditional law enforcement resources proved insufficient. Witnessing digital evidence of human suffering took severe psychological toll on these anonymous heroes. They reviewed graphic content documenting abuse and exploitation while maintaining emotional distance necessary for effective investigation. The constant exposure to human cruelty led to burnout, anxiety, and depression among digital vigilantes. Many operated without formal support systems while processing traumatic evidence daily. Digital heroism operates in legal gray areas where the ethics of unauthorized computer access conflict with humanitarian goals. Yet sometimes heroism emerges not from digital battlefields, but from physical spaces where professionals face immediate life or death decisions. The nurse who ran toward gunfire. During a hospital mass shooting, one nurse's quick thinking saved hundreds of lives. Sarah Chun was working the night shift at Metropolitan General Hospital when gunshots erupted in the emergency department. While other staff members froze or ran for cover, Chun immediately activated the hospital's lockdown protocol. She sealed critical access points and coordinated patient evacuations through secure corridors. Her actions prevented the shooter from accessing the intensive care unit, where dozens of vulnerable patients lay connected to life support machines. Healthcare workers face increasing violence in their workplaces, with nearly 1 in 4 nurses experiencing workplace violence in the past year, according to the American Nurses Association. Hospital emergency departments have become particularly dangerous environments where staff encounter patients suffering from mental health crises, substance abuse, and extreme stress. The combination of understaffing and high patient acuity creates volatile situations that can escalate rapidly into physical confrontations or worse. Medical professionals have become first responders to violence in ways they never trained for during nursing school. Chun understood that her medical knowledge made her uniquely qualified to assess threats and coordinate emergency responses. She could distinguish between patients requiring immediate medical attention and those who posed security risks. Her clinical experience taught her to remain calm under pressure and make rapid decisions that could mean the difference between life and death for multiple people. The split-second decisions required during active shooter situations demand extraordinary mental clarity and courage. Chun had seconds to choose between personal safety and professional duty. She chose to run toward danger rather than away from it. She identified which patients could be moved quickly and which required specialized equipment for transport. Her decisions were based on medical triage principles applied to crisis management. Every choice carried life or death consequences for people under her care. Medical training translates directly to crisis leadership because healthcare workers regularly manage emergencies under extreme pressure. Chen's experience treating trauma victims prepared her to function effectively during the shooting. She understood how to prioritize actions based on greatest need and available resources. Her communication skills enabled her to coordinate with security personnel and law enforcement while maintaining patient care standards. Chen's actions prevented a much larger tragedy by limiting the shooter's access to vulnerable patients and critical hospital areas. Her quick implementation of lockdown procedures saved dozens of lives in the intensive care unit. She coordinated the evacuation of surgical patients and newborns from areas that would have been difficult to defend. Her leadership inspired other staff members to follow established emergency protocols rather than panicking. The ongoing trauma faced by healthcare workers after violent incidents includes symptoms of post-traumatic stress, disorder, anxiety, and depression. Chun continues to struggle with sleep disturbances and anxiety attacks months after the shooting. Many hospital employees require counseling and mental health support to process their experiences. Medical heroism extends beyond treating illness to protecting vulnerable populations from violence and maintaining healthcare services during crisis situations. Yet sometimes heroism requires standing alone against powerful interests that prefer to ignore inconvenient truths. The prophet of climate disaster. Dr. James Hansen issued climate warnings in 2001 that seemed impossible until catastrophic events proved them right. He predicted global temperatures would rise by 2 degrees Celsius within 20 years, causing unprecedented heat waves, droughts, and sea level rise. Government officials dismissed his projections as alarmist, while fossil fuel companies funded campaigns to discredit his research. Hansen worked at NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies, where he developed climate models that accurately predicted temperature increases, melting ice sheets, and extreme weather patterns. Scientific predictions often face skepticism until it's too late to prevent damage because they challenge existing economic and political systems. Hansen's early warnings about Arctic ice loss seemed impossible when he first published them in 2003. He predicted that summer sea ice would disappear completely by 2025 and that Greenland's ice sheet would begin irreversible melting. These projections contradicted conventional wisdom that climate change would occur gradually over centuries rather than decades. Hansen joined other researchers whose early warnings were dismissed by authorities who preferred optimistic scenarios. Dr. Michael Mann faced congressional investigations after publishing research showing rapid temperature increases. Dr. Catherine Hayhoe received death threats for explaining how climate change would affect local communities. These scientists understood that their careers depended on maintaining scientific credibility while communicating urgent warnings about environmental catastrophe. The specific climate predictions that seemed impossible at the time included temperature records that would be broken repeatedly within single decades. Hansen predicted that heat waves would become so severe that existing infrastructure would fail. He warned that hurricanes would intensify rapidly and that flooding would affect coastal cities worldwide. His models showed that agricultural regions would experience crop failures due to extended droughts followed by devastating floods. Political and economic interests suppressed scientific findings through sophisticated disinformation campaigns funded by fossil fuel companies. These organizations spent millions creating fake research institutes and paying scientists to publish studies questioning climate change. They pressured academic institutions to silence researchers and influenced media coverage to emphasize uncertainty rather than scientific consensus. Government agencies were forbidden from discussing climate change in official communications. The personal cost of being a scientific whistleblower included professional isolation and financial hardship. Hansen was prohibited from speaking to journalists without government approval. He faced budget cuts that threatened his research program and attempts to reassign him to less visible positions. His family received threatening phone calls, and his home address was published online by climate change deniers. Recent climate disasters validated these early warnings as temperature records fell across the globe. The 2021 Pacific Northwest heat dome killed hundreds of people and reached temperatures that Hansen had predicted 20 years earlier. Arctic sea ice reached record lows, while Antarctic ice sheets began collapsing exactly as his models predicted. Scientific heroism often requires challenging systems that threaten human survival despite personal and professional consequences. Yet heroism also emerges in places where basic services have completely collapsed. The teacher who reached the unreachable. In remote areas where education seemed impossible, one teacher created a revolution. Maria Santos arrived in the mountains of northern Afghanistan in 2021 carrying nothing but a solar-powered tablet and determination to reach children who had never seen a classroom. The Taliban had banned girls from attending school, while boys faced restrictions on curriculum and teaching methods. Santos understood that traditional education systems had failed these communities long before political upheaval made the situation worse. Educational inequality has worsened in many parts of the world as conflicts and economic instability have disrupted learning for millions of children. Between 2020 and 2025, the gap between urban and rural education widened dramatically. Children in remote areas fell further behind their peers in cities, while technology promised to bridge these gaps, but often remained inaccessible. Santos recognized that waiting for government solutions meant losing entire generations to ignorance and poverty. Teachers working in extreme conditions developed innovative methods that would be impossible in traditional school settings. Santos created mobile classrooms that could be assembled quickly in caves, abandoned buildings, or forest clearings. She developed curricula that combined basic literacy with practical skills like water purification and crop rotation. Her students learned mathematics through calculating seed quantities and studied geography by mapping local water sources and trade routes. The innovative methods developed for remote and dangerous areas required constant adaptation to local conditions and security concerns. Santos disguised lessons as religious instruction when authorities grew suspicious. She taught science through traditional crafts and embedded history lessons in local folklore. Her students learned to read using texts printed on fabric that could be hidden inside clothing or buried underground when searches threatened their safety. Technology enabled education in previously impossible locations through satellite internet connections and solar-powered devices. Santos used tablets loaded with educational content that worked without internet access. She created virtual classrooms connecting students across multiple villages and provided access to libraries and museums they would never visit physically. Her students practiced languages with native speakers thousands of miles away and attended science demonstrations broadcast from laboratories in distant countries. The personal sacrifices made by teachers working in isolation include abandoning family relationships and accepting constant danger. Santos left her home in Mexico and lived in a single room without electricity or running water. She learned local languages and customs while navigating complex tribal politics. Her isolation was complete during winter months, when mountain passes became impassable and communication with the outside world ceased entirely. These educational efforts transformed entire communities by creating the first generation of literate adults in many villages. Santos trained local residents to continue teaching when she moved to other areas. Her students became teachers themselves, establishing schools in neighboring communities. The economic impact was immediate as newly literate farmers could access market information and negotiate better prices for their crops. Educational heroism often goes unrecognized by authorities who view independent teachers as threats to established systems. Santos faced arrest and deportation from multiple countries. Her work received no official support or recognition despite transforming thousands of lives. Government officials preferred maintaining ignorance to risking educated populations demanding change. Teaching has become a form of resistance in many places where education challenges existing power structures and promotes critical thinking that threatens authoritarian control. Yet heroism also emerges when nature unleashes its fury and ordinary people become extraordinary rescuers. The forgotten heroes of natural disasters. When disasters strike, the first responders often come from unexpected places. Hurricane Ida slammed into Louisiana in August 2021 with winds exceeding 150 miles per hour. While official emergency services struggled to reach isolated communities, ordinary citizens grabbed boats, chainsaws, and medical supplies. They launched rescue operations from their driveways and coordinated through neighborhood Facebook groups. These civilian heroes saved lives while government agencies were still assessing damage reports. Natural disasters have become more frequent and severe in recent years, with climate change intensifying storms, floods, and wildfires beyond historical precedent. The 2020 wildfire season burned over 10 million acres across the western United States. The 2021 Texas winter storm left millions without power for weeks. Hurricane Ian in 2022 caused catastrophic flooding across Florida. Each disaster revealed the same pattern: official emergency services overwhelmed, while civilians stepped forward to fill critical gaps. Civilian first responders emerged during recent catastrophes with remarkable courage and resourcefulness. During Hurricane Harvey, in 2017, a group of restaurant workers in Houston used their delivery trucks to reach stranded families. They navigated flooded streets that emergency vehicles couldn't access and rescued over 200 people in 3 days. In California's 2020 wildfires, neighbors formed bucket brigades to protect homes when fire departments focused on larger structures. These improvised operations required split-second decision-making and intimate knowledge of local geography. The improvised rescue operations carried out by ordinary people demonstrated extraordinary innovation under pressure. Civilian rescuers converted fishing boats into ambulances and used construction equipment to clear debris from roads. They established temporary shelters in schools, churches, and community centers. During the 2021 Tennessee flooding, neighbors used four-wheel drive vehicles to reach elderly residents trapped in their homes. These operations required coordination between people who had never worked together before. Social media changed disaster response coordination by enabling real-time communication between scattered volunteers. Facebook groups became command centers where civilians shared information about flooded roads, missing persons, and supply needs. Twitter helped coordinate boat rescues during Hurricane Florence. Instagram stories documented rescue operations and connected survivors with family members. However, these platforms also spread misinformation that complicated official response efforts. The physical and emotional challenges of disaster rescue work took severe tolls on volunteer rescuers. Many worked for days without sleep, pulling bodies from wreckage and comforting traumatized survivors. They witnessed destruction that left lasting psychological scars. Civilian rescuers often lacked proper safety equipment and training, putting themselves at risk. The emotional burden of choosing who to save first haunted many volunteers long after disasters ended. Climate change is creating new categories of disaster heroes as extreme weather events become more common and severe. These ordinary people demonstrate extraordinary compassion and courage, revealing the best of human nature when communities face existential threats. Yet courage takes different forms when the threat comes not from the journalist, but from those who would silence truth itself. Investigative journalism has become one of the world's most dangerous professions. The Committee to Protect Journalists reported that at least 67 journalists were killed in 2023, with many more facing threats, imprisonment, and harassment for their work. Corruption and authoritarianism have made truth-telling a life-threatening activity, as powerful criminals use violence to silence reporters who expose their crimes. Anna Politkovskaya dedicated her career to investigating war crimes and corruption in Chechnya. She worked for Novaya Gazeta, documenting human rights abuses committed by Russian forces and local militias. Her reporting revealed systematic torture, civilian killings, and mass graves that authorities wanted to keep hidden. She traveled repeatedly to dangerous regions where other journalists feared to go. Her investigations provided crucial evidence of atrocities that would otherwise have remained buried. Journalists who risk everything to expose powerful criminals develop sophisticated investigative techniques that often surpass law enforcement capabilities. Politkovskaya used hidden cameras and recording devices to document evidence of corruption. She cultivated sources within military and government circles who provided classified information. Her method involved cross-referencing multiple sources to verify claims and building comprehensive cases that could withstand legal challenges. She spent months gathering evidence before publishing stories that exposed criminal networks. Digital surveillance has made journalism more perilous as governments use sophisticated technologies to monitor communications, track movements, and gather information about sources. The use of spyware like Pegasus allows governments to hack into journalists' phones and access their data. Politkovskaya's communications were monitored by security services who used this information to intimidate her sources and plan attacks against her. The personal costs faced by journalists and their families include constant threats, financial hardship, and social isolation. Politkovskaya received death threats regularly and was poisoned during a flight to cover the Beslan school siege. Her family lived under constant fear, knowing that her work put them all at risk. She was forced to change her daily routines and avoid public appearances. The psychological toll of constant danger affected her relationships and mental health, while financial pressures mounted as advertisers withdrew support from her newspaper. Her investigations led to real-world justice, as international courts used her reporting as evidence in war crimes prosecutions. Her documentation of mass graves and systematic torture provided crucial testimony that held military commanders accountable. European governments imposed sanctions on Russian officials based on evidence she gathered. Anna Politkovskaya was assassinated in Moscow on October 7, 2006, in the elevator of her apartment building. She was shot 4 times by a contract killer hired by those she had exposed. Her murder sent a clear message to other journalists that investigating corruption could cost them their lives. Yet her death also revealed something else. The same technologies that made her work more dangerous were creating new possibilities for resistance that traditional authoritarian methods could not control. The resistance fighters of the digital age. Encrypted networks and secure communication tools have enabled resistance movements that operate beyond traditional government control. In Belarus, Hong Kong, Myanmar, and Iran, digital activists have created underground networks that coordinate protests, share information, and document human rights abuses. These resistance fighters use smartphones, laptops, and satellite internet connections as weapons against oppression, enabling communication when governments shut down traditional networks. Digital technology has created possibilities for fighting authoritarianism that previous generations could never imagine. Activists in Iran used Signal and Telegram to organize nationwide protests following Mahsa Amini's death in police custody. They coordinated demonstrations across multiple cities simultaneously while sharing real-time updates about police movements and safe escape routes. These digital tools enabled protesters to stay ahead of security forces who relied on traditional surveillance methods. Modern digital resistance requires sophisticated operational security practices that rival intelligence agencies. Activists use burner phones discarded after single operations, create multiple digital identities that cannot be traced to their real names, and communicate through encrypted channels that automatically delete messages. Some have learned to modify their phones to prevent government spyware from accessing data, while others use mesh networking technologies that function without internet infrastructure. The technical methods for organizing secretly include blockchain-based messaging systems that cannot be shut down by central authorities. Activists create digital dead drops where information can be shared without direct contact between operatives. They use cryptocurrency to fund resistance activities while avoiding traditional banking systems that governments monitor. These techniques require knowledge acquired through underground training programs conducted in secret locations. International coordination happens through encrypted networks spanning continents. Hong Kong protesters shared tactics with activists in Belarus, while Iranian dissidents received technical support from programmers in Silicon Valley. This global network enables local resistance movements to learn from each other's successes and failures. Software tools, surveillance countermeasures, and digital security protocols spread rapidly between different authoritarian contexts. The consequences faced by digital resistance fighters include imprisonment, torture, and death sentences for online activities. Governments use artificial intelligence to analyze social media posts, identify protest organizers, and predict resistance activities. Maria Kolesnikova was sentenced to 11 years in prison for coordinating protests through encrypted messaging apps. Activists face constant surveillance, monitoring their digital communications, physical movements, and family relationships. Living under perpetual surveillance creates severe psychological toll on resistance fighters who must assume every digital action is monitored. They develop paranoia about electronic devices, change communication patterns frequently, and struggle with isolation from friends and family. The mental health impact includes anxiety, depression, and trauma from witnessing government violence against fellow activists. Artificial intelligence serves both oppression and resistance, as governments deploy machine learning algorithms to identify dissidents, while activists use similar technologies to evade detection. Modern resistance requires new forms of courage because digital activists face threats in both virtual and physical spaces simultaneously. Yet courage also emerges in unexpected places where individual innovation creates solutions that save lives on a massive scale. The invention that saves lives daily. A simple device invented in a garage now prevents thousands of deaths annually. Tom Rodriguez worked from his suburban garage in Phoenix, Arizona, developing what would become the most important safety innovation of the 21st century. His collision avoidance system uses basic radar technology to detect when vehicles are about to crash. The device automatically applies brakes and steers away from obstacles when human reaction time proves insufficient. What started as a weekend project to protect his teenage daughter became a global safety standard. Life-saving innovations often come from unexpected sources rather than corporate research laboratories. Rodriguez had no formal engineering training, but possessed intimate knowledge of automotive mechanics, gained through decades of repairing cars. His breakthrough came after analyzing thousands of accident reports and recognizing patterns that professional engineers had missed. He understood that most crashes occur because drivers don't react quickly enough to sudden obstacles. His solution was elegantly simple yet remarkably effective. Independent inventors working outside traditional research institutions face unique challenges that corporate researchers never encounter. Rodriguez spent 3 years developing his prototype using salvage parts from junkyards and electronics purchased online. He tested early versions on abandoned airstrips and closed parking lots. His garage laboratory contained oscilloscopes, radar components, and computer processors arranged on folding tables. The development process required learning complex programming languages and understanding electromagnetic wave propagation without formal education in these fields. The development process demanded persistence through countless failures and refinements. Rodriguez's early prototypes failed catastrophically during testing. Radar sensors gave false readings in rain and snow. Computer processors crashed during emergency situations. Brake systems responded too slowly to prevent collisions. Each failure revealed new problems that required months of additional work. He documented every test result and gradually improved system performance through systematic trial and error. Regulatory obstacles nearly prevented the innovation from reaching the market. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration required extensive testing and certification that cost millions of dollars. Rodriguez couldn't afford the compliance fees or the lawyers necessary to navigate bureaucratic requirements. Government agencies demanded documentation that individual inventors couldn't provide. The regulatory process seemed designed to exclude independent inventors while favoring established automotive manufacturers. Financial struggles often determine whether breakthrough technologies reach the public. Rodriguez maxed out credit cards and mortgaged his house to fund development costs. He worked nights as a mechanic to support his family while developing the collision avoidance system during weekends. His wife took a second job to pay for electronic components and testing equipment. The financial pressure nearly forced him to abandon the project multiple times. Patient advocacy groups eventually funded critical work when traditional funding sources proved inaccessible. Families who lost loved ones in preventable accidents donated money directly to Rodriguez's research. Their financial support enabled Rodriguez to complete development and begin manufacturing. Global adoption of his invention has saved an estimated 50,000 lives annually, according to traffic safety organizations. Major automotive manufacturers now license Rodriguez's technology and install it in vehicles worldwide. Innovation heroism often requires persistence against bureaucracy that seems designed to prevent progress. Sometimes the most profound impact comes from individuals working alone in garages, while chaos unfolds on the other side of the world. The unsung heroes of Kabul. When chaos erupted in Kabul during August 2021, unknown heroes saved thousands of lives working in complete anonymity. Thousands of Afghans crowded around Kabul airport seeking escape from Taliban rule. While international media focused on official evacuation flights, the real rescue operations happened in shadows coordinated by individuals who risked everything to help strangers reach safety. The fall of Kabul created desperate situations requiring extraordinary courage from ordinary people. Ahmad Hassan worked as a taxi driver in Kabul, but transformed into an evacuation coordinator when the Taliban seized control. He used his intimate knowledge of city streets to guide families through Taliban checkpoints using back roads and abandoned buildings. His taxi became a mobile command center equipped with multiple phones and encrypted messaging apps. Hassan coordinated with volunteers across the city, creating safe houses and escape routes that avoided Taliban patrols. Individual organizers developed unofficial rescue operations that operated with military precision despite having no formal training. Sarah Chun, an American teacher living in Dubai, organized evacuation efforts from her apartment using social media platforms and personal contacts. She created detailed spreadsheets tracking hundreds of Afghans seeking evacuation, matched them with volunteer pilots, and coordinated transportation to airports across the region. Her network included former military personnel, aid workers, and Afghan diaspora communities who provided crucial local knowledge. The dangerous work of getting people to safety required split-second decisions and constant adaptation to changing conditions. Evacuation organizers guided families through Taliban-controlled territories using coded communications and predetermined signals. They arranged transportation in disguised vehicles and coordinated timing with aircraft departures. Some organizers crossed into Afghanistan physically to escort vulnerable individuals to safety. The work demanded expertise in logistics, security, and crisis management that these volunteers developed through necessity. Informal networks proved more effective than official channels because they operated without bureaucratic constraints. Government evacuation programs required extensive documentation and security clearances that took weeks to process. Volunteer networks moved people within hours using personal relationships and trust-based systems. Afghan Americans and Afghan Canadians used family connections to identify people needing evacuation and arrange their escape. Evacuation organizers faced personal risks, including arrest, imprisonment, and death threats from Taliban forces. Many volunteers received threatening messages warning them to stop their activities. Some had family members detained as leverage to halt rescue operations. The psychological pressure was enormous as organizers made life-or-death decisions for hundreds of people while facing constant threats. These efforts continued long after official evacuations ended as thousands of Afghans remained stranded in dangerous situations. Volunteer networks maintained operations, providing safe houses, transportation, and documentation assistance. They established refugee support programs in neighboring countries and helped evacuees navigate complex resettlement processes. Humanitarian heroism transcends political boundaries as volunteers from different countries collaborate to save lives. Crisis situations reveal unexpected heroes who emerge from ordinary circumstances to perform extraordinary acts of courage. Yet sometimes heroism requires challenging the very institutions designed to protect society's most vulnerable members. The social worker who broke the system. Linda Martinez discovered that protecting children sometimes means dismantling the very systems designed to safeguard them. Working for the Department of Children and Family Services in California, she witnessed systematic failures that destroyed young lives daily. Children were placed in dangerous homes where abuse continued unchecked. Foster families received inadequate support and training, leading to placement breakdowns. Teenagers aged out of the system without basic life skills or stable housing. Martinez understood that incremental reforms would never address these fundamental problems. Foster care systems worldwide have failed countless vulnerable children through bureaucratic neglect and institutional indifference. In the United States alone, over 400,000 children live in foster care at any given time. These children experience placement instability, with the average child moving between 3 different homes during their time in care. Educational disruption is common as children change schools multiple times, losing academic progress. Mental health services remain inadequate despite the fact that children in foster care experience trauma at rates far exceeding the general population. Martinez challenged institutional failures by documenting specific cases where the system failed children catastrophically. She tracked children who died in foster homes despite prior reports of abuse. She identified patterns of neglect where caseworkers failed to conduct required home visits. Her investigations revealed that many foster parents received minimal training before taking custody of traumatized children. The documentation she compiled became evidence that institutional practices were systematically endangering the children they were supposed to protect. Systemic problems required radical solutions, including chronic underfunding, inadequate staffing, and policies that prioritized bureaucratic efficiency over child welfare. Caseworkers carried caseloads exceeding 30 children when best practices recommended no more than 15. Background checks on foster parents were superficial and failed to identify unsuitable placements. The emphasis on family reunification often returned children to abusive homes without addressing underlying problems. Martinez recognized that these issues required fundamental restructuring rather than minor adjustments. Individual advocacy led to policy changes when Martinez presented her findings to state legislators and child welfare advocates. Her documentation provided concrete evidence of system failures that lawmakers could no longer ignore. She testified at hearings describing specific cases where children suffered preventable harm. Her advocacy resulted in legislation requiring enhanced training for foster parents, increased funding for mental health services, and reduced caseloads for social workers. These changes improved outcomes for thousands of children across the state. Reform-minded social workers faced professional risks, including disciplinary actions and career retaliation for challenging established practices. Martinez received written warnings about her advocacy activities and faced pressure to stop documenting system failures. Supervisors threatened to transfer her to less desirable positions. Her willingness to speak publicly about institutional problems put her at odds with administrators who preferred maintaining the status quo. Her efforts improved outcomes for thousands of children through systemic changes that addressed root causes rather than symptoms. Foster parent training programs reduced placement breakdowns by 40%. Enhanced mental health services helped children process trauma more effectively. Reduced caseloads allowed social workers to provide better support to families. These improvements created lasting benefits that extended far beyond individual cases. Sometimes the most profound change comes not from government programs or corporate initiatives, but from individuals who choose to fund solutions that others ignore. The anonymous benefactors. Secret donors have funded life-saving research that governments and corporations ignored. Between 2020 and 2025, anonymous philanthropists provided over $2 billion to medical research projects that major pharmaceutical companies considered unprofitable. These hidden benefactors understood that breakthrough treatments often emerge from investigations that traditional funding sources overlook. Their contributions enabled researchers to pursue innovative therapies for rare diseases that affect small patient populations but cause devastating suffering. Medical research often depends on the generosity of unknown philanthropists who operate completely outside public recognition. Dr. Elena Rodriguez received anonymous funding that enabled her to develop gene therapy treatments for Huntington's disease. The donor contacted her through encrypted communications and transferred funds through untraceable cryptocurrency transactions. This financial support allowed Rodriguez to conduct clinical trials that would have been impossible through conventional funding channels. Her research team never learned the donor's identity, but their work saved dozens of lives. Anonymous funding for neglected diseases fills critical gaps where market incentives fail to drive innovation. Pharmaceutical companies invest billions in treatments for common conditions like diabetes and heart disease because large patient populations generate substantial profits. Rare diseases affecting fewer than 200,000 people globally receive minimal attention from major corporations. Anonymous donors understand this disparity and deliberately fund research into conditions that affect small numbers of patients but cause extraordinary suffering. These donations enabled breakthrough treatments that transformed patient outcomes across multiple rare disease categories. Anonymous funding supported development of enzyme replacement therapies for lysosomal storage disorders. Hidden philanthropists provided resources for clinical trials testing antisense oligonucleotides for muscular dystrophy. Their contributions accelerated research into immune system disorders that predominantly affect children. The financial support often arrived at crucial moments when researchers faced budget shortfalls that threatened to halt promising investigations. Donors choose to remain anonymous for reasons ranging from privacy concerns to philosophical commitments about pure altruism. Some wealthy individuals prefer avoiding public attention that comes with high-profile charitable giving. Others believe anonymous donations prevent recipient organizations from tailoring their requests to donor preferences. Anonymous giving eliminates expectations about naming rights recognition ceremonies and ongoing involvement in funded projects. The donors focus entirely on research outcomes rather than personal recognition or social status. Private philanthropy fills gaps in public funding where government agencies focus resources on politically popular projects. Anonymous donors support controversial research areas that receive limited government attention. Their contributions enable investigations into conditions that affect marginalized populations or require experimental approaches that regulatory agencies view skeptically. The flexibility of private funding allows researchers to pursue innovative strategies without bureaucratic constraints. Financial heroism enables scientific breakthroughs through sustained commitment to advancing medical knowledge. Anonymous giving represents pure altruism, where donors seek no personal benefit beyond the satisfaction of improving human health. Yet heroism emerges not only from wealth, but from ordinary people who notice details that others miss. The Vigilant Citizen. Kevin Martinez was waiting for his morning train at Grand Central Station when he noticed something unusual. A man in a heavy coat, despite the warm September weather, kept checking his watch and sweating profusely. The backpack at his feet seemed oddly positioned, and the man avoided eye contact with other passengers. Martinez had attended a citizen awareness training program the previous month, where instructors taught participants to recognize suspicious behavior patterns. Terrorism prevention often depends on citizen awareness and quick action rather than sophisticated surveillance systems. Law enforcement agencies cannot monitor every public space simultaneously. They rely on ordinary citizens who notice unusual activities and report them promptly. The most effective counterterrorism programs combine professional intelligence gathering with community vigilance. Citizens serve as the first line of defense because they understand what normal behavior looks like in their neighborhoods and workplaces. Martinez wondered if his suspicions were justified or if he was profiling an innocent person. The training program had emphasized trusting instincts while avoiding discrimination based on appearance or ethnicity. He focused on specific behaviors rather than physical characteristics. The man's nervous movements, heavy clothing in warm weather, and positioning near a crowded area created a pattern that warranted attention. The decision-making process of reporting potential threats involves weighing personal safety against public responsibility. Martinez considered the consequences of being wrong versus the risks of staying silent. He remembered instructions about providing detailed observations to authorities without confronting suspects directly. Using his smartphone, he discreetly photographed the suspicious individual and immediately called the transit police hotline. He described the man's location, behavior, and unusual characteristics while maintaining visual contact from a safe distance. Training and awareness programs enable citizen heroism by teaching people to recognize warning signs and respond appropriately. These programs educate participants about behavioral indicators that might suggest criminal planning. They emphasize the importance of reporting suspicious activities, even when individuals feel uncertain about their observations. The training includes scenarios where citizens practice identifying potential threats and communicating with law enforcement effectively. Martinez's training prepared him to act decisively when he encountered suspicious behavior. The psychological impact of preventing mass violence created lasting effects on Martinez and the broader community. He experienced anxiety and stress while waiting for authorities to respond. The knowledge that his actions potentially saved lives brought both relief and emotional burden. Community members expressed gratitude, but Martinez struggled with the responsibility he had carried. Community vigilance has thwarted numerous attacks through citizen reporting and cooperation with law enforcement. These interventions range from identifying suspicious packages to reporting unusual behavior patterns. The effectiveness of community vigilance demonstrates how ordinary people can contribute to public safety through simple awareness and willingness to act. Each successful intervention reinforces the importance of citizen participation in security efforts. Modern heroism emerges from countless individual choices to notice what others miss and act when action matters most. These 20 individuals prove that heroism in the modern age takes countless forms. The programmer who stopped global cyber catastrophe. The teacher who revolutionized education in war zones. The nurse who saved hundreds during chaos. Their stories demonstrate that recognition and fame have nothing to do with the impact someone can have on the world. Real heroes work in shadows, making sacrifices that most people never witness or understand. Look around your own community. Notice the social workers fighting broken systems, the volunteers rescuing disaster victims, the activists exposing environmental crimes. Consider how you might contribute to positive change. The next unsung hero could be you.